it's such an honor to be part of this conference. I always say that I'm a practitioner. My journey started with chaos engineering about 6 years ago when I created this team within Prime Video. Casey and I very often compare notes, and ultimately what we find out, so we started our journey with chaos engineering a little bit at the same time. So it's actually a lot of fun to meet him and discuss and compare our experiences. So let me share my screen. And with that, we start talking about chaos engineering, and specifically the topic that I want to zoom in today is building resilience with chaos engineering. Building resilience in your business. I would be happy to share the practitioner journey, answer a lot and frequently asked questions that we have on this topic. And round it up with what is resilience, and kind of, bring it back to us, to humans, because it's been a different year. And it's been a year where all of our resilience kind of raised the bar collectively. So we'll take a look at that as well. So the way I was thinking when I was preparing the session, how to best organize it, and I kind of went back to our Amazonian tradition of starting with frequently asked questions. When we introduce a product or launch something new, we start with frequently asked questions. So working together with Russ and Casey and going to different conferences over the years, there's really 3 questions that stood out that I hear often. The first one is, why should we care? Why invest in chaos engineering? Show me the money. Where's the business case? Why this is so interesting, right? The second question usually that comes up, where do I start? And the third question is, okay, I've started. I'm in the beginning of my journey. How do I make meaningful progress? So those 3 pieces we're going to be breaking apart today and digging into answers for all of them. Just to simplify, when we think about these questions, they're ultimately in 2 buckets. The first bucket is really about a decision. You are making a decision to intentionally start your chaos journey, your resilience journey. It's an investment, right? And you need to basically figure out why you're doing it. And the second part of it, once you made the decision, you're going on a journey, and it's its own part in there. So let's break it apart and start with the first thing, which is, what is the input to decision? If there are many of you who might be thinking about where do I start, and they kind of sort of like figuring out how to frame that decision, how to talk to your business partners, how to convince others around you, what are the inputs that you will collect to have a quality discussion? And I always say that go to the very beginning, to go to the roots. And the roots is go to the principles of chaos engineering. Spend time reading it through and connect it with material. Because under the hood, when you look at the very explanation of chaos engineering, it's not the jazzy thing that, sometimes, comes to the mind that this is about breaking things. It's actually, you're doing it in a controlled environment. You have to have well-planned experiments. And what you really do while you're doing this, you're building confidence in your applications to withstand turbulent conditions. Well, there is a lot packed in here. So the second question that you might want to do, okay, I've read the basics, I understand what it's about, but how is it relevant to me? So let's dig through some scenarios. Are you ever finding yourself after a launch or a release looking at the performance loading screen and error, or maybe some errors are creeping up and they're happening more often? It happens, right? I think the more difficult part is when an incident happens is, how do you contain the blast radius? How do you understand that blast radius super quickly? It takes time to pinpoint where the errors are coming from, and it takes time to react. This is what I typically call, it's our operational culture, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, but that blast radius, it's not easy to dig. And if you also find yourself sometimes, fighting fires on a periodic basis because your business has seasonality. Maybe your deployments have seasonality, and you're finding that there are periods where you're in this firefighting mode, then the session is for you. On the flip side, if you just take away operations and think about projects, if you go, no-go decisions are easy and you do them within minutes, then it's great. Maybe the session is not for you. Maybe there is something, maybe you're doing something great and you want to share it in the next chaos engineering. But what I've noticed personally as a practitioner, a lot of projects that we're launching, it's never necessarily 5-minute decision that's we're going to do a launch. There's a journey also that's involved, and the journey very often focused on test results and risk mitigation. And again, chaos engineering and then figuring it out, how do we bring quality data to the table, will help you there. Okay, so why I'm focusing on errors and why this topic comes up? Well, we put together, my engineers and I, where all the errors can come from. And as you can see, it can happen anywhere in the stack, or sometimes the common thing that we run into after a launch, there is, especially for videos, there is some obscure device that may be not in use very often, and, it gets missed, and you will see that error creeping up. So what do? Do you distrust everything? Do you distrust every single line of code? And what do you distrust? So let's take a look. Well, this is probably the slide that you've seen a few times, but this is how our systems and relationship between them look like. And if you're on the receiving end and figuring out what can I do to improve my confidence in the system, and this somewhat chaotic pictures, what is the mental model that will help me? Very often the journey will lead you to the discussion about testing. Maybe this is all about testing. Okay? Maybe. Let's take a look. And the traditional testing, things that we're used to, we're focusing on functional components. We're focusing on isolation of capabilities. We are basically very often test for known conditions. But how do you test for resilience? How do you test for the things that are in this picture? All of the relationship and the white spaces between services. How do you test for that? Okay. And I think the answer is, and has been given to us a few years ago, when we basically change our mindset as an industry, as a practitioners, and I say we broadly, it's people that I see here on the screen and many of you who are listening in, that failures is a given and everything will eventually fail. So what you do, you really prepare and test for failures in your systems. And that's a big mind shift and change that has happened over the years. So these were all of the inputs. You can collect data that is specific to your business to sort of like figure out which of these levers and which of these pain points are a little bit more important, relevant to you. But these are typically the things to start with when you're making a decision. So let's assume that you've made your decision, you had that conversation with your business partners, with your engineering teams, and you said, great, decision made. I think we're convinced. This picture of the relationship that we have between the services, that makes sense. We need to change the way we do things. So where do I start? A classic quote will definitely work here, which is a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. So let's take the very first steps that Amazon had. And that mindset that we typically code as we test for failures, that we take for granted, was created by Jesse Robbins, that we called Master of Disaster. He joined Amazon in 2001, and what he invented there is a concept of a game day. And the game days were slightly different than the way we know them right now. They were failure simulation scenarios that were super crazy at the time, like turning off email for an entire day or turning off databases for a few hours and see how systems will recover. The process of testing for failure stuck and become a cultural phenomenon and become a norm. And this is what Amazon does consistently, especially when we prepare for Q4. Okay. So let's pause a little bit. Okay, so these are all first steps. How is it relating to me? Where I am as a listener, as a person that is thinking about this, what do I do? Okay, so let's take a look. Where can you start? My recommendation, again, as a practitioner, is always start with a very specific business case. You can take a look what's happening with your department, with your organization, where your company is going, and make decisions on what is the biggest thing that you're trying to solve. Is there a specific event? Is there a content launch, if you're in the video industry, that is happening that will be super crazy and super popular? Or is it something else that is driving you? Is there a specific seasonality? Are you launching a new country? Or are you launching a capability that you've never had before, and you need to make sure that this capability works from every single angle, right? So figure out and start with a business case. The second input to your journey is figure out the trends, collect the data and the trends. And what do I mean by that? Take a look at your systems profile. How old are your services? How old are your services? How systems? Do you have a mashup of architectures? Are you in that place where maybe part was created a long time ago and part is brand new? How does it mesh? What is that histogram? What is the distribution? And by the way, when you have that architecture assessment and assessment of your services, what is your number one source of errors? Because then you can have a quality discussion and reason with how that sources of failures and errors are tied to that specific event or a specific capability launch that you're worried about. You can tie that to your business case. And the last input, it's a bit subjective, but you can measure it, is really your thoughts about an assessment of culture. And the culture specifically is, what is your operational muscle? How quickly, your engineers are able to detect through the observability tools that they have in front of them, here's the issues, here's what we've done, and make a decision on recovery or some alternate path super quickly, so it's almost seamless to your customers. That operational muscles and instincts, they're super hard because they need to be wired into humans. And if one of your goals is to change the operational culture, it is about there, so that the teams are always ready. So that's another input into what you can consider. On the left, I'm showing a couple of screens, specifically that the events are different, and just wanted to share an example. In one specific case, it was a launch of Bundesliga match, and what we needed to do is we needed to be ready for specific subscription spikes, for example, right? And in this case was the match was between the rivals, got so interesting, and you see like regular on ramp and whatnot, but this black line in the middle was actually mid-time when the goals started happening, and you have tons of customers coming in during that. So we needed to think through scenarios like this and be ready for that. The second graph that I'm showing, it is a launch, but that was not a live event launch. It was video on demand. And what we needed to do, make sure that we can sustain the load for many, many customers enjoying the show. And what we've learned that a lot of the customers were rewatching. And if this is the case, we needed to make sure that we can sustain that load over time. Right, so the different business cases that you need to think through when you're trying to figure out your journey. Okay. So let's talk about the playbook. Playbooks are frameworks. They're super helpful because it helps you almost think through what your strategy is and what you're going to do about all of these inputs that you're collecting. Now that you've collected the inputs, right, the next thing that you're going to do, you're going to think through how do I prioritize my business case? And this is where you could engage with your business partners and say, here's the launches that are coming up. Here's the things that we're going to do. Which one the most important? If we want to invest in resilience, let's have an intentional discussion where that investment will be and why. So work with your business partners to help form a definition and conviction about this. The second thing that you want to do is, measure the trends, set key performance indicators, set your improvement goals, because you want to approach chaos and resilience engineering as a business, as any other business that you will run. And what do? We measure health and performance of business or a function, right? So this is the second piece that you're going to do. Collect data and figure out a set of goals that you want to drive. And of course, aim to change culture, using chaos and resilience principles, and be bold about this. Set it as some of the goals that you want to do. So let's talk about Prime Video, because you probably want to say, show us the money, how you did it. What was your business case for Prime Video? And the business case from Prime Video, and I use the words launches. So launches for me, it's launching the content that many of you know and love. For us, being able to serve global audience and making sure that we are ready for various scenarios was super important. And especially became super important with Grand Tour, where we had about 8 million customers around the globe, but with built-in audience, we're taking Prime Video worldwide. So scaling and focusing on the scaling and making sure that we're ready to support this volume was that number one business case that we were preparing for at the time. And we were very clear on that business case. Okay. If you're still thinking through, if the business case is not clear, and maybe some of you like to have a theoretical foundation, very often when I get stuck, need a refresher, and need to jumpstart my thinking, I keep going to Little's Law. Right? And what the Little's Law basically says that number of customers in the system is really a product of the arrival rate and how long the customers are staying in the system. Why this is important? Because if you connect deeply with this formula, you can start thinking through theoretically what is important for your different business case and what do you want to focus on. In the Bundesliga, in those cases that I showed you before, and for a number of live events where this is an appointment viewing TV and the arrival happens within very short amount of time, this arrival rate comes into prominence, and we want to make sure that we have test cases that simulate the scenario. Okay. I'll show you on the next slide just a little bit more practical examples how we've applied over years and what we've learned to do better with Little's Law. And what we've learned that parts of our system, part of our customer journey, discovery, for example, selection of content, transactional for different pieces, they all scale with customer arrival rate. And as you can see, what we do in those services that tie to these functions, absolutely, we do load testing, but we also do a lot of chaos injections and failure injection, specifically in this in the stack, right? With the playback, when customers hit play button and just is there and the video continues to play, the drivers are slightly different. So this is where the total number of customers in the system and session duration comes into play. And what we really lean into and do more of is various scenarios for load testing. We typically do performance testing across the board, and this is done at a team level, at individual service or function release. We probably would typically do a bit more rigor on both performance testing and load testing in the playback area, and as I said before, and stress testing in the playback area, and then more experimentation on chaos side on the things and the services and functions that scale with the customer arrival rate. Okay, so the practitioner journey. The journey started, as I said before, was regular Q4 preparation in Amazon, and we quickly realized that actually in digital media, we need to be ready throughout the year, and your show can become popular around the world anytime. So we shifted the gears. We created what I call it evergreen programs. We created our own tech. I have an engineering branch that build internal products. And we are at the point we have fully automated scaling. We basically run scaling experiments for that low test, stress test, performance test, and automation in an automated function 3 times a week in production. That question also comes very often. Do we do it in production? Yes, we do it in production. This year, last year, we've done lots of progress on automating chaos experiments, and now we have capabilities where we're injecting chaos experience. Chaos tests as we run scaling tests at the same time. And that's super helpful. And I'll show you a couple of examples where and how we did it and why we're doing this way. Okay. Again, if you're just starting and you're thinking through, great, that sounds really good. Here's your journey and what I can do. You can steal my playbook. Happy to share. There are a set of programs that I've consistently run over the time. So, these individually single-threaded leader programs, they focused on set of measures and improvements that we do on availability, scale, resilience, peak readiness, and performance improvements. And you basically organize them with specific goals and with specific leaders. What I wanted to point out that in traditional Amazon culture, we don't necessarily have dedicated SRE engineers because we're big believers in ownership. We believe that teams need to own their code at the individual level, but fundamentally, what we find is within each team, there is always an engineer that just drawn to high-scale tests, loads, performance, and doing chaos injections. So we have this single point of contact model within each team. Okay, so let's dig in a little bit more, into how to break down maybe some of the perception. Okay, and I know that answering the way it's being answered here, these are all real practitioner examples. This is what my team had conversations with. So I'm sharing it based on their real life, my real life experience and my team experience. So there is a perception that starting with chaos is hard. Okay, maybe it's true, maybe it's not. But I think if you go back to the basics, go back to the customers, go back to the business case and truly understand your business case and bring that back to your partners, your business partners, your engineering partners, then it becomes more manageable and becomes much easier to carry a conversation with. I had a debate recently when somebody said, Olga, why wouldn't we just talk about risks? Here's my business partners. I'm going to list them risk 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And then just have a conversation about risks. And in my personal view, a conversation about risk is less interesting versus coming to your partners and saying that I understand what we're trying to accomplish. Here's my understanding of a business case. And here's what we want to do. Let me partner with you and let me show you how the proposal that I have for you will help you to achieve your goals. Okay. And this is much more powerful discussion in my view. No time, no flexibility. Okay, so if you don't have an automation, you can do is a process simulation. Super simple things. And I show a few simple things in the deck as we go along. Well, the developers already spending time doing fixes. You know what? There is a secret in chaos and resilience engineering we don't talk about. And the secret is it's a lot of fun. Your engineers could have much more fun fixing their bugs if they do failure injections and if they run chaos experiments consistently on their code. It just catches fire. It's a lot of fun to see people doing this. It can be political, yes. No denying this. What do I mean by that? At the end of the day, there is a conversation about trade-off. You're trading off some resources, you're asking for investment. And I think any conversation about trading off resources, maybe, or asking for more resources, is not an easy conversation to have. And you know what? Trade-offs are okay. As long as you have your data, remember in the playbook I was showing, if you understand your measures, your KPIs, your business case, what is driving the majority of the failures, you're okay. Have those discussions. You're probably going to find yourself that your partners, business partners, and your engineering partners and peers will support you if you bring data to the table. Okay. And then some teams could be super deeply invested in technology, and that's okay. There's multiple ways to achieve the chaos experiments. So, and I'll show it a few couple concrete examples. Okay, so how do we make progress? My recommendation is when you think about making progress and making this consistent investments, you start with goals, not resources. I see very often people saying, I need this team and I need this and this and this. And starting a conversation, what do you need on resourcing side is just not that interesting, or maybe not as productive. Then starting conversation, here's a goal that I want to take for this year. And that goal reflects the business case that you want to solve and support that you want to provide your business partners. Super powerful. And typically when you start with the goals, resources will come. Okay, so let's talk about goal strategies. So what can you do with the goals? How can you set the goals, right? The goals really, in my mind, in my experience, divided in 4 parts. You can do breadth versus depth. You can be specific versus generic. You can take a goal as a single owner, or you can take goals in partnership with somebody. And I'm going to walk you through with examples because I thought that let's spend some time. This is a juice. This is the most interesting part probably of today's discussion. And there's also coverage versus experimentation. So let me give you some examples that I've collected that worked for us over the years. So breadth versus depth. In the slide here, I'm showing most frequently used chaos experiments within my team. And ultimately, what you can do, you basically have 2 choices, right? You can say that, hey, I can have a goal that says 100% of the teams will execute 5 experiments monthly, and these are top most frequently used experiments at the bottom. It's a great way to start. If you're just beginning your journey, or if you're just convincing your organization that this is what you want to do, you want to invest in chaos, I would suggest go deeper, maybe on some capabilities that you know will help raise the bar in your technology stack, and go that route. However, if you want to increase a little bit more of a coverage, not more of the core failure test scenarios, you can go for something different. You can say that at least 5 teams in my engineering organization will execute all available experiments. That's perfectly fine. You're just moving a different needle in this specific case. Okay. One of our teams contributed to AWS open source blog last summer. And specifically, what the situation was, we were launching profiles feature. Okay. The goal was, and that team is one of the pioneers in using chaos testing, and love working with the team. They're amazing. What they wanted to do, they basically wanted to confirm, because there are so many dependencies, right? Remember that ball of dependencies? They wanted to make sure that all of their timeouts are configured correctly. And the assertion was that we should see no more than 40 milliseconds as a timeout across the board. Okay, great. So what did they do? They ran a load test that generated 1,000 requests. And what did they find out is that actually, and they injected 2 seconds latency, that the result was that the timeout was set at 6 seconds. Okay. They had a configuration bug, and running that experiment helped them find that box and potentially prevent an outage in the system. So this is a preventive example where a failure injection helped us. On the reactive side, very often what we see is downstream dependency being throttled, right? And maybe potentially causing availability drop. So what is the solution? So solution will be, yes, you do a fast fail circuit break of sorts. The tough part is, how do you test it, right? So this is, again, where chaos engineering and chaos experiments come to rescue. You can run this dependency throttling, you can inject the latency, and you can see and measure how quickly the circuit breaker kicks in, and making sure that dependencies stay healthy. So this is a very typical case of what our teams would do as a reaction to the incident, and making sure that they tested the fix and using chaos for that. Okay. I'm going to do something different. So if you're just thinking about process side and you don't have yet automation, so let's have fun with the process side. So when we launched English Premier League in 2019, right, our generic goal was avoid a very large feature wave, make sure that we were releasing in beta early. Okay, so that was a project goal. On the technical side, we had a super specific availability goal. It's a must not fail event. We wanted to have and make sure that there is 100% availability. So that's a very specific goal. And to achieve that, there were multiple mechanisms that we've done, but we consistently lean into game days and simulations. And these are chaos and resilience mechanisms. So let's take a look at some of them. Okay. Specific goal, again, for the launch is we needed to make sure that our engineering teams are able to detect and resolve any issues real time. That's specific goal. The way we addressed that specific goal, the mechanism that we used was a simulation. For the simulation, we had a generic goal in the specific case. We basically said that, you know what? We want that, and it was a massive launch, many teams are involved, and we were doing something like this for the first time. We wanted to make sure that the participants during this first launch, they understand roles, responsibilities, they have all the resources for monitoring, for observability, for decision-making in place, and we wanted to confirm that. So that was our simulation goal. So what did you do? For this specific case, we flown our teams to London. It was obviously not a COVID year. It was a different year. You know, we've done it completely different this year, and we did it virtually, and we basically used only probably 1/10 of the preparation compared to initial launch. But we flew a lot of engineers in London. We got a test stream, and we were ejecting failures in that test stream. The way we did it, we didn't tell the teams when we were doing it, but what we told the teams, we were very clear that we're setting expectation that we will be measuring the teams on the operational culture. Remember that operational muscle that I keep saying is, and we're basically saying, we're going to measure how quickly you found the issue. We're going to measure how quickly you mitigated the issue. And we're going to measure how quickly you identified what the blast radius is and pinpoint all of the players' functions that are part of the issue that you also need to mitigate. Okay, so teams were super clear on this. So how did we do the simulation? What you can do? Well, take a look at the recent high severity events. So we took a look at the real things. We also did a brainstorming, what could be a risk. We have not, as I said, we haven't told the teams what we're going to do. And yes, we did a crazy thing a little later where we operated multiple scenarios at the same time. Just have fun. So let me show you an example of what was actually happening. In blue, these were simulations where you don't have to have the technology. They were process things that you can easily do if you don't have the tech yet. For example, an operator error, cut and paste, right? Be it a marketing tool or maybe some content that is customer facing. People under pressure make mistakes, and very often, sometimes you can see cut and paste errors. So you can simulate that. Misconfigured links, again, you can simulate that. And another piece is, when you have multiple teams contributed to a large launch, how do you manage communication? It's almost like a science and an art at the same time. And you need to be able to help the teams and train them on separating red herrings, issues, noise from what the real things are. So that was also part of what we're trying to accomplish. Okay. And then on the tech side, host failures were a big fan. We were totally big fan of running that. We did run experiments because it was in December. You don't know what the weather will be like. The same way is it's hard to predict what the weather is like during winter season. So what happens if there's power out? What happens if there is no video conferencing? Similar to what just beginning of this conference session, we had to make sure we test our tools and everything is ready and set to go. So you just do it at a very large scale, right? And the other more interesting things on the tech side was loss of a signal and then CDNs and ISP failures. So those were simulations that were super helpful. Okay, and I wanted to share those concrete examples because I wanted to make sure there is an understanding that it's okay to have process side of it where you can start without tech and just, show what worked for us on the technical side. The next piece as you go through your thinking and decision-making on goals, this is a lot of times it's overlooked, but this is super powerful when you do it well. Goals ownership, what do I mean by that? Who takes the goal? You as an individual leader, as an owner of a central team, or do you take the goal in collaboration with your partners? Maybe you have dependency, or do you give the goal as a gift to somebody else? And it's typically, I see it's more complex, more progressive as you go along. So let me share some advice, how you can think through this. If you control inputs, meaning that my team builds new tech, and I don't necessarily have any dependency on somebody else, super happy to be a single-threaded leader to take that goal. It just makes sense, right? When I have dependency on other teams, and it's not a lot of dependency, but key dependencies, there's maybe an investment or some technology that we really rely on, I would reach out to my peers and say, look, let's take a joint goal. And it would make sense because we might have different friction and schedule. Maybe may have different drivers and resources. So taking a joint goals will help us to stay in sync, even though my partner priority may change, but the joint goal will always connect us on the common delivery. Okay. And then the last part is super hard to do, but this is so powerful when it's executed well, is if you find yourself in the situation where you succeed, where many succeed, specifically with the game days, I gave an example that we do a lot of load testing and case injection testing, right, across various stacks. And I run a central team. I don't run all of the experiments. At the end of the day, these experiments are owned by engineers, not the orgs. So we succeed in making sure that the experiments are valid, they make sense, they work well, they're done in advance when many teams succeed. So last year, I distributed these goals and gave them as gifts to my peer group. And it was a super powerful experience because I had partners in making things work across Prime Video. And this is, again, you have to be probably a bit more mature with your tech and a bit more mature in your case and resilience journey. Highly recommend this approach if you didn't think about it yet. Okay. And adoption, last part versus experiment goal is super easy, right? You can basically say that, hey, certain number of systems will adopt this specific tech by this date. So that's an adoption, right? An example of adoption. An experiment is You may not always know where you want to invest the majority of your resources. How do you tease it out, right? So you can be flexible on that decision on investment. So what you can do, you can basically commit to a pilot by a certain date. And once the pilot is done, you will have a rollout plan and have some sort of milestone of how you accomplish this rollout plan. And I've done a number of this in the past, again, when I was just in that stage where we needed to have an experiment and to think through specifically how and where we want to invest. Okay, so while we talk about goals, right, I wanted to bring it back that, yes, we started with the goals, but I talk about goals because I really think that goals lead to resilience. This is a mechanism of how you can make your systems better, how you can improve your partnership, how you can sort of like raise the bar, operational bar across your staff. But why you all do it? Because you want to have resilience in your systems. And it's, as I said before, it's been a different year. Our systems, a reflection of us. We as humans, we need resilience too. Here's an interesting fact. We don't talk enough about the scientist. She's amazing. She's Dr. Amy Werner. She spent 40 years studying resilience in kids. And her findings kind of, I did research at the same time as I was building resilience framework for my system and systems and programs. And it just struck me how much of what her findings, they run in parallel to who we are as humans. So let me share what she said. So what is resilience? So it's a process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, significant sources of stress. Adapting well, right? Kind of familiar. There's a parallel here is failures happen. And we need to adapt well to those failures, right? That's a similar theme when we talk about services and systems. The next is super interesting. Resilience is ordinary, not extraordinary. It's not something we have or don't have as humans. It's not given to us at birth. It's a very ordinary feature. And that was eye-opening for me when I kind of uncovered that, her thinking. So what it involves behaviors, thoughts, and actions that can be learned and developed in anyone. So let's just pause. This year that we just all went through, the year of resilience, involves behaviors, thoughts, and actions that can be learned and developed in anyone. Okay. The interesting part of it is my entire talk is about behaviors, thoughts, and actions, because what are the goals? These are the things that will drive behaviors, thoughts, and actions. So there is a lot of similarities here, and I very often find that studies in humanities, they're highly applicable to technology as well. But what's the journey takeaways? Let's take a look. Let's do a summary. So let's start with a specific goal. And when you start with a specific goal, understand that business case, right? Understand what matters to your business partners. Understand what matters to your customers that you have, right? The first step is important. I gave you a bit of a playbook, how to think through your inputs to that first step and how to set your goal. And I also shared some strategies here. How do you want to go about taking those goals, right? And decide on ownership. And guess what? The second iteration, the second step, you're going to do it year after year. You're going to come back, review what you've done last year on the goals, and you're going to look at the same playbook and the same strategies and do something bigger and better the year after. And the driver for all of this is keep learning about your customers, create that feedback loop between your learnings and your customers, because this is all how it's all coming together. So looking ahead, there is probably no talk about, talking about what the future holds. I don't know what the future will hold. It's hard to predict. But what I know for sure is that we continue to experiment, bringing the content that all of you who are the customers and hopefully folks who are watching English Premier League and other sports events on Prime Video and Play, we will continue to bring these new features. And as we do so, we will continue to run chaos and resilience experiment. I'm also expanding my team, growing new parts of it, so we'll continue to grow. The second part is I found that distributing ownership of the goals is a very powerful mechanism when it's done well. So I think when you're dealing with a subject of scaling your chaos mechanism, scaling your chaos goals, figuring out how do you partner through taking joint goals and then distributing goals to others so other leaders and organizations run those goals. Super powerful. Continue to lean into this. And obviously, as you do so, strike the right balance. What do I mean by that? Is figure out, again, go back to customer and figure out what's important for a business, start there. There is a bit of an Easter egg in this presentation. I think Casey will be smiling because the image here is actually from a Chaos conference from last year. So the message here, I hope we'll get to do cool stuff and keep sharing with all of you.